Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are just waiting for you all to filter in, and then we will get started in just a couple of moments. Thank you for joining us today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Inside Housing webinar. We today are going to be looking at how social landlords can best support residents to benefit from energy efficient systems. And I'm delighted you are with us here today as we do just that. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Claire Reid. I'm a contributor to Inside Housing, and I'm your chair for today's event, which is being supported by Sureserve. Let me also introduce you to our excellent panelists. Cassandra Dove is Net Zero Policy Lead at the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, the SHFA. As the name implies, the Federation is the national representative organisation for housing organisations and cooperatives in Scotland, and Cassandra's role specifically involves supporting those organisations to deliver warm, safe and affordable homes. Samuel Duncan is dual fuel engineer at Sureserve. So Sam, as he's asked me to call him, so he doesn't feel like he's being told off, works in residents' homes to install, repair and service heating systems. He and his colleagues work with housing associations on sustainability, and so increasingly his work focuses on renewable technologies. And Gina Somerville is Managing Director and founder at Green Rose CIC. That's a social enterprise based in North Lancashire. Gina and her colleagues offer free energy advice and support to local households, all with the aim of helping to improve energy efficiency, reduce bills for residents, and for those homes to become more sustainable. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to our panelists who will each be giving a short presentation. They're going to be sharing their experiences of supporting residents to get the most out of energy efficient systems. Now, as I suspect everyone watching this webinar can attest to, that isn't always a straightforward proposition. I think the adage of no pain, no gain can often feel like it applies in this context, because the reality, as we know, is that the likes of retrofit can be pretty disruptive to residents, and that sustainable heating systems often need to be approached in a very different way to traditional systems to get the most out of them. In advance of this webinar, we actually ran a roundtable, again with SureServe, looking at some of these issues. A report from that will appear in the June issue once I've written it, so to keep an eye out for that. But resident representatives were at that roundtable and quite rightly spoke of the need to build trust and understanding when approaching these kinds of projects. So part of what we're going to be talking about today is how to build that kind of trust and understanding. However, if you are watching live, then you can let us know what else you would like us to talk about. That's because in the second half of today's session, the panel and I are going to be having a general discussion about the issues involved. And as an audience member, you can pop any questions you'd like us to consider as part of that. To do so, just follow the prompts on your screen. I always encourage people, do not be shy, pop in any questions that you have. I know sometimes I think people sit back and think, oh, well, that might come up anyway, but do just pop it in, because if I was going to ask it in any case, seeing you ask it is reassurance that it's something that you want us to consider. A question that I often get is whether or not there will be a recording made of this webinar. There will be. We're a bit like the BBC, we do live and then we do the catch up on iPlayer. So you will be emailed when that's made available, and indeed any colleagues who may have wanted to join us today but were unable to do so will be able to access that recording. So please don't worry, on demand to follow. First up, though, before we get to that audience question and answer part of the session, I am going to hand over to our panelists to speak to us. And first off, I'm handing it over to Cassandra, who, as I say, is from the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, the SHFA. Cassandra, over to you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for that introduction. I think these slides should be coming up. Yeah, so I'm Cassandra from the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations. I guess I'm here to give a bit of a higher level view and a particular view from Scotland. If we can move to the next slide, please. So yeah, I'm going to touch on some of, I guess, the wider policies driving change around decarbonisation, and then some reflections from the sector about what has worked well on the ground from our members, and some of the challenges that still need to be overcome. Next slide, please. So I guess on the policy side of things, first of all, in Scotland, so some of the kind of key things that are driving things at the moment. So we have the Heating Buildings Bill, which is just about to be introduced to Parliament, and that will set out the general direction of travel in terms of the requirements for all homes to install clean heat by 2045. There has unhelpfully been some delays to this, some kind of confusion and activity in the press recently about, it was being scrapped. Now it's just a kind of change in approach. So the legislation and targets are really important. And, particularly in terms of, the general public messaging in terms of what people are being asked to do. So any delays, changes, uncertainty really doesn't help with that messaging. The next part I've highlighted there is the particular standards for the social housing sector. So again, there have been delays to this. It's taken quite a few years. We're still waiting on that being finalised, but the proposal at the moment is that there would be a kind of energy efficiency standard and then a clean heat requirement. Again, 2045 being the backstop date for that. And then finally, the third thing is the fuel poverty strategy. And I just want to highlight that just because particularly in Scotland and particularly in the social sector, fuel poverty is a hugely challenging issue. The latest stats showed that about 61% of social tenants were in fuel poverty. And we have targets in Scotland to try and eradicate that as much as possible. But unfortunately, we seem to be going in the wrong direction, partly due to kind of the recent experience of the energy crisis. But these are all kind of things that are driving where things are going from a policies perspective. And there's certainly been lots of conversations about making sure our net zero targets and fuel poverty targets aren't working against each other. So I know today's webinar is focused on how social landlords can best support residents through that decarbonisation journey, but it also needs really strong leadership from government and a policy environment which offers clear messaging on why we're making these changes in the first place. Next slide, please. So yeah, I think in looking at how we can best support tenants on that journey, it's about understanding the context and the starting point that many of those residents will find themselves in. As I mentioned, fuel poverty, huge issue at the moment. But what that means is that, reducing carbon emissions isn't necessarily the priority for tenants. It's about saving money. It's about having an affordable heating system which gives them a comfortable living environment. I think local circumstances are a really big part of this as well. Again, in Scotland, quite geographical differences. We have, lots of rural and remote areas, which are already in kind of off-gas areas. We also have, I guess, a history of maybe other local schemes where certain technologies have been installed and maybe didn't work as well as expected. So there's the legacy of all that experience. Levels of disruption as well. I mean, I know that much of the work that we're talking about here in terms of kind of deep retrofits, fabric improvements, complete heating system changes, they're going to be quite invasive. And compared to, a standard boiler replacement, we're potentially looking at much lengthier disruptions and potentially even kind of decanting tenants to alternative accommodation while that work is done. So we need to be taking a holistic approach. It needs to be the right package of measures for that property type and for that household. And that's why we've been arguing for there to be flexibility in terms of the standard rather than pushing a particular solution. Next slide, please. So in terms of the education and support, I think there's different tiers to this. So I think we need to be looking at a national level. We need that clear and consistent public messaging on what people are being asked to do and why. At a project level, we need really robust tenant engagement plans that are built in from the beginning, and that requires sufficient timescales and resources within individual projects. And I know that's been one of the pitfalls, with kind of certain funding programs, particularly the main fund that we have here in Scotland. The timescales in which projects have to be delivered make it really difficult to embed that process in. And I think similarly for monitoring and evaluation of these projects as well, understanding the impacts of interventions is really important to identify performance issues potentially, and then remediate any things that are identified and ensure that the benefits are being maximised. And then I think that brings in the importance of the handover phase as well, and it moves us into that third point about the individual advice and that ongoing support. Advice and guidance on operation of new systems is key to ensuring that they operate efficiently. And I think with new technologies, this needs to be more than just a handover of an instruction manual. Feedback from our members who offer their own sort of in-house energy advice services have highlighted the importance of kind of key principles. So one being holistic services that include both proactive and reactive support. So it's not just about engaging when things go wrong. Having a customer-centred approach, so tailored to the need of individuals, and the value of face-to-face advice where possible. And it's recognised, obviously, that can be more difficult and resource-intensive to deliver, but it's also going to become increasingly important as we look at the rollout of clean heat technologies, and tenants seek ongoing support with these kind of unfamiliar and new technologies and more complex tariff offerings, for example. So the last point, in terms of ensuring success. So I think we've already kind of touched on this, but I think that involvement in decision making from as early a point as possible. And again, that starts at the national level. In Scotland, we've had some really good examples in terms of Scotland's Climate Assembly. And we also have organisations like Tenants Together Scotland who are working with government to make sure that the tenant voice is fed into these policy decisions. Practical learning, I think that hands-on experience of seeing how a new technology or upgrades look and feel, and we can maybe come on to the discussion some good examples of where that has worked well. Collaborating with partners as well. I mean, as I mentioned, many of our members will offer their own in-house energy advice services. Also, some really good examples of where they've worked with third parties, particularly the smaller organisations who might not have the resources to deliver that service themselves. We have a strategic partnership with Changeworks and Warmworks, and they've had some really kind of good examples of tenant engagement projects, which again we can maybe touch on in the discussion point. And then that last point, sharing outcomes, and I think events like today are a really good example and platform for sharing the learning on what works or maybe what hasn't worked so well, so that we can all learn from those experiences. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some further examples from Sam and Gina as we move into that. So yeah, I think that's from me. Hopefully that kind of gives some food for thought and maybe prompt some topics for discussion.
It does indeed. That's brilliant. Thanks, Cassandra. What a great way to open, and really interesting in particular, I think, to hear you talking very sensibly about the need for clear guidance from government. I think something that we often hear, understandably, is the need for example, funding from government or support from government in that way. But actually talking, as you say, about the need to set an agenda and to set a clear understanding right from that national level, I think is really important. And also, as you say, the classic, how do net zero and fuel poverty issues fit together, and the challenges of thinking that through, and what the motivation is for individual residents and indeed for housing associations in considering retrofit work or new builds looking at sort of renewable heating systems. That's great. Thanks, Cassandra. Thanks, as I say, really helpful opening. We're moving to Sam next, and Cassandra was talking about the importance, very sensibly, of sort of face-to-face and direct conversations with customers. Enter the man who does that every day, and Sam, bless him, has already done two customer visits this morning already. So we were saying earlier he's already done a full working day before he's come to this webinar. So Sam, over to you. Tell us a little bit about your experiences, if you would.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. So my name's Sam. I'm the dual fuel engineer working at Sureserve Compliance Central. I'm also a Sureserve Compliance Central Master and Representative. And I'm going to sort of share a little bit about the Sureserve views on it, and also my personal views of how one thing that we all struggle with, but also one thing I can help tailor to get the most and get the real benefits of renewable technology. So can I have the next slide, please? So as you can see, about Sureserve, their mission is to be the trusted partner of choice to the social housing and related public sector in just delivering essential and affordable heating, energy savings and compliance solutions. We're playing a key and progressive role in decarbonisation, always delivering for customers, employees, residents and the environment with safety, integrity and respect at the forefront of everything that we do. And it is really key to really emphasise how important all these real values are. As you can see, we've got a number of offices, engineers, and the staff that we have, and also whereabouts in the UK we are based. As you can see, with our latest acquisition is Low Carbon Exchange, and that is another step closer to becoming a more green credential, a lot more carbon net zero company as we're trying to progress with new technology. So next slide, please. So as you can see, the common customer concerns are cost of electric bills, which we get quite often with heat pumps, and debunking myths about renewable technology is also another key one. There's so much in the sort of social media side and things like that where people put their own opinions, and a lot of people take them as factual or take them as that's how they're all going to work. But in fact, it's really about tailoring it and making it work for each individual property. As you can see, the heat pumps efficiency, really explaining how they work and how we can tailor that to be the best version of itself, the best efficiency, to of course create the benefits that you can receive as a consumer. And as we go through going into tailoring it for each property, every property is different, and of course everyone has their own comfort level of thermal status. So it's key to make sure that each property is defined in its own way and detailed and tailored to make sure that we're maximising the efficiency, but also the benefits for you, the consumer, afterwards. As you can see along the bottom there, we've got electrical use versus gas savings. So essentially, we can look at a existing gas installation and see that X amount is going into gas savings and Y is going into electric. And we can then combine the two to not only working different from a gas boiler, because of course renewable technology is a different adaptation to how to really benefit and perform, because heat pumps alone can generate 1 kilowatt of electrical energy in up to 3 kilowatts of heat energy, which is a 300% efficiency rating. So that's where these kind of numbers come from. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. So when we're trying to tailor it to your property, of course, the first position is scaling. So you've got to make sure that it is the correct size, it's correct output, but also it's not going to be oversized, as they are quite big bulk units, and of course, positioning is key. We know that they're not often the nicest things to see outside a house, but also we need to make sure that we are putting them in the perfect position, again, to maximize efficiency. Another point is understanding the changes and adaptations. As I said earlier, it is a complete change from gas and LPG and oil appliances, which of course burn non-renewable sources, which can happen quicker, but not always as efficient as it so tells. So again, that all depends on how to do the heating and hot water in the best circumstance for the consumer. So then again, we go across to the comparing side of things. As we said earlier, there's a lot of comparison between them, but it's also, as new technology, it's something we have to adapt to. And I think that when the understanding and adaptation has been made, that benefits can then come back onto the consumer to really emphasize how good the system can be when it's fit for purpose. So again, you see the adaptations, you see the realizing improvements, and then all this is on our website, on Sureserve, and you can look into green products that we do. Next slide, please. So how are we going to do this? So we want to reach out to the individuals that are in these properties to make sure they have got the thermal comfort, but also the energy and efficiency that they are so required. We want to make sure that each customer is dealt with professionally, but also individually. We don't like to just say the same thing for all 10 houses, because of course they're slightly different. So as you can see, we're adapting to new technologies, pushing the forefront of how can we make things more efficient and how we can get things to really be at the point where people are satisfied with what they're achieving, also satisfied with what they are achieving in terms of green credentials and how efficient they can be, how good for the environment it can be to use a renewable source. So on the second point, it's regular maintenance and communication. So we like to pride ourselves in getting in a service every year, annually, and bringing it close to make sure that we can efficiently communicate how we can get to these people's properties, how soon we can get to them, and of course if there's any issues, how we can separate time to really get down to the bottom of the issue, and also how to liaise with customers, residents, to make sure that it's working for them. So having these heat pumps, having these solar systems, having a lot of renewable technology does come with its new style of adaptations, and it's something that we are keen to work towards in communication with us ourselves, the manufacturers, and then also the residents that it's providing. And the real communication can be in material form, or can just be on the phone, or it can be again in person. In person, it would be nice to see exactly how we can make the system adapt better, how we can sort of teach and also advise on how the best usage for these individual properties can be to really gain that better understanding. Next slide, please. So again, on my side of things, I go into properties day in, day out, and it's great to really have a good conversation with each individual resident and consumer, and to really make sure that they are getting the best out of their systems, out of their heating units. And I know that recently the government's put a massive boost of £1.8 billion into that sector, and Sureserve are keen to make sure that not only are we pushing the boundaries to make sure we're getting people's properties more efficient, giving them heating systems that they can really rely on, but also teaching and advising how these people can work these individual systems and not be afraid to say go back to gas, because the real prime part of this is to create a better environment, a better renewable system that also works in terms of the residents' needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That was great. And the point that you kept coming back to, I think, very, very sensibly, and that I have written down, is tailoring, adaptation, and talking about that, I suppose, both from the perspective of individual residents or families or households, however we're describing it, but also individual properties, and thinking of that aspect as well. And you touched there too on the importance of efficient communication and adapting communication methods as well to individual tenants, households, however we're describing that. And I have no doubt that we were going to come back to both of those areas when we come to our little discussion bit, not least actually because that builds beautifully on what Cassandra was saying about the importance of communication and thinking about how best to communicate with different residents. Thank you. Georgina has been, I've seen nodding and smiling throughout her colleagues' presentations, so I think she's going to build beautifully on what we've heard from both Cassandra and Sam. Before we move into Gina's presentation, just a quick reminder that once her presentation is finished, we're coming into the sort of Q&A, general discussion-y bit of the session. So if there are questions that you would like to ask our panel, do pop them in. I can see them already coming in, which is absolutely brilliant, but just a quick reminder to anyone who was holding off, pop those questions in because we'll be coming to them shortly. But first off, I'm delighted to hand over to Georgina to share her reflections.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. I wanted to sort of start off by talking a little bit about our experience with working with residents. We work with residents who are social housing tenants, but we also work with owner-occupiers, and we work with those in the private rented sector. But how social landlords sort of start this process really came to my attention during lockdown. When we were locked down, we were doing remote energy advice phone calls, and we actually did quite a lot of phone calls across Scotland. And it came to my attention very quickly that with the kind of rural profile of the stock, some social landlords were putting in air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps across sort of large numbers of tenants. But the tenants were speaking to us and saying, my home feels colder, my bills have gone up, I don't know how to use it, I was left a manual, I kind of didn't understand how to use it. So we've come across these issues with social tenants, and we also work with Cozy Homes in Lancashire, which is the council-backed scheme to get local residents to take up Hug and Eco, so to have retrofit in that way. And again, we see the same kinds of issues. I think many challenges in this area is how to get the information across to residents. It is disruptive to have people in your home. Something we've worked with Cozy Homes in Lancashire and with local residents around issues of hoarding. It's something that we discovered. Sometimes people are refusing these measures or very hesitant to take up these measures because actually they are in a hoarding situation. We were very lucky to be able to enlist the help of a local community centre, and they've now actually set up a discrete project with its own fundraising to try and help people get through those challenges of hoarding. So that's one thing that I think definitely for social landlords to consider. My very first kind of grown-up job was working with a social landlord in London, helping vulnerable tenants to keep their tenancies. And I personally kind of supported people through that and through that hoarding. I think one of the problems sometimes, especially with social landlords, is not giving residents enough time to get used to the idea, enough time to maybe deal with issues around health, around hoarding, around perhaps possibly being needed to be decanted or whatever it is. And really the support I think residents need is education and real kind of deep partnering with them to work through it. It's not enough to have someone come in, fit something, and then be just left with a manual, exactly as how Cassandra said. So I've got some case studies here for you today. And these are residents who've actually had Hug, but I think the principles are still the same between either social private tenants or home owner occupiers who have had these works done. So if I could have the next slide, please. We're going to see some positive, some cautionary, and some mixed case studies. So I've got a few for you. So if I could have the first slide from those case studies, please. So this is our kind of more positive one, a lady who, she lives rurally. She's had support from the Hug scheme to have an air source heat pump, solar panels, and a battery system. And obviously she's very happy. This is a lot of work to be done on your home and to get for free. But she does have some reservations, which is the stress and confusion over the lack of user manuals, the lack of setup guidance. As probably all of us today watching this know, when you have, for example, a heat pump, you can't switch it on and off like a boiler. But if that's not clearly expressed to the resident, how are they going to know? So you can be really left, people can be left with those feelings of insecurity because they don't really know what they're doing. So even when the delivery is good, vulnerable residents need practical, easy to understand guidance post-installation. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is from some of our residents in Blackpool, an air source heat pump and new radiators. So this is one of our cautionary ones. This gentleman feels that the system is less effective than his old heating. His home feels colder, his bills have got higher. And again, that's probably because he doesn't understand how to manage. If as a housing association, the only person your tenant is going to speak to about these installations is the installer. The installer's there to install. They're not necessarily there to give education. They don't necessarily have the best bedside manner in terms of explaining it. It's perhaps better to bring people together into an education situation, a workshop or whatever it is, to try and get people to really understand what they're going to sign up for. So no matter how good the technology, how advanced, retrofit is incomplete without that proper onboarding from the household. Next slide, please. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, oh, can we go back one, please?
It's always the way, isn't it?
Great
Always
stuff.
the way. There we go. We're on the right one.
So this one is entitled Confusion from Day One, which, you know, again, I just don't know what they put in. I wasn't told anything. Again, it's about that communication, that real, you know, just that partnership. Try and partner with your tenants, with your residents. A situation we had, which actually it did involve new technologies, but it wasn't renewable technologies, on a local traveller site near where I live in Morecambe. It's been completely redone, and they've put in new water boilers and new radiators for residents. They've built them a kind of day room that they can use alongside their park home. But they didn't give them any information about them. Their bills have gone up. The housing officer actually approached me and asked me to bring my team down. We looked around and we realized that the water boilers that they're using, combined with the electric heating that they're using, is why their bills have gone up so high. But even the housing officer didn't understand how those systems worked, or why they would be more expensive than what they had had before. So again, it's really important to share it with not just your staff who are doing the work, or your staff who are in the kind of property maintenance side, but with your staff who are going to be seeing the resident day to day. Ideally, the housing officer should be an expert and should be able to run community days, workshops, give that one-to-one advice. So where engagement is weak or fragmented, even those keen to support energy efficiency can fall through the cracks. May I have the next slide, please? So another one, disruption and confusion during the installation. And this is a story we hear a lot. They just gave me a manual. I don't understand any of it. So this resident actually does feel warmer, but the kind of association they have with that lack of communication, with that distress of not really knowing what's going on, has just made them feel negative about the whole thing. So even vulnerable residents can feel distressed, even when the technology itself is good. Next slide, please. And this is, I believe this is my last slide. And the kind of lesson I think behind this is that this is a person who said they were very satisfied. They said the installation has gone very well, that, you know, they liked the installer, they had a positive experience with the installer, but they don't actually know if they're benefiting from it yet, because they haven't been given any metrics to assess whether it's working, whether all that upheaval and disruption was actually worth it, because they haven't been told how it's going to help them or what is supposed to change. So again, it's perhaps giving people with solar panels, with heat pumps, some kind of way to monitor, actually, this is reducing your CO2, this is bringing down your bill, whatever it is, giving people, empowering people to understand why all this disruption was worth it. So thank you. So to conclude, please involve your residents, make them your partners in this process.
Thanks, Georgina. That's great, and a powerful message, an important message to end on. Loads of good stuff there, and really helpful also to have those case studies and those specific examples of, as you said, ones that have gone well, ones that have sat somewhere in the middle, and perhaps ones that have gone less well. Interesting to me also was you mentioning hoarding, because it struck me actually that really comes back to what Sam was talking about understanding individuals and individual needs and so on. And at the risk of giving yet another plug to something that's in Inside Housing, we have some hoarding stuff at the moment on Inside Housing Management, our new offer for frontline staff, and that strikes me that it ties in really well, Gina, to what you were talking about there. You talked very sensibly about education and partnering, and interestingly, I think, emphasizing that it's not just about partnering with residents, but actually about education and partnering across a social landlord organisation, and indeed with installers or whoever else might be involved. That's great. We are now moving into the question and discussion portion of our event, and I have loads of questions already in. Keep them coming. If we don't get to them in this session, I might I might impose on our panelists to see if they might pop some answers on email afterwards. But I wanted to start sort of really, I suppose, talking about this idea of tailoring advice and engagement with residents. And I suppose this idea that the job isn't finished when the installation is done, that actually that's the beginning of the process rather than the end of it. A couple of questions, I suppose, on that kind of area. First off, Paul has asked, and this will be one for you, Sam, I'll come to you in a moment on this, about how long Sureserve's engagement is with tenants after you've been doing an installation or whatever. You mentioned obviously yearly services and so on, but be interested to hear a little bit more about that in a moment. And then I'm also going to bring together some other sort of questions that sort of sit around that topic. Which I suppose is about time. So Brian says, working with and understanding tenants is very important. As a tenant board member of Energise Barnsley, we have spent a lot of time making sure tenants understand how solar panels work and how they can help reduce bills. At the moment, we're in the process of installing 1,000 homes with panels to the tenants. Information and time is very important to have face-to-face conversations with tenants. So I suppose there are two parts there. Sam, I'm going to come to you first on this idea of how long you have the opportunity to engage with tenants on this. And then secondly, Cassandra and Georgina, I'll probably come to you on this idea of how do we find the time to engage with residents on this. But over to you, Sam, first. Tell us a little about how Sureserve manages this customer engagement side of things and over what time period it's possible to do that.
That's great. Well, thank you for the question. Yes, so yearly we annually service all the units that we have and all the customers that we see. Especially solar panel, solar thermal, and some heat pumps are quite popular. So there is the time, of course, after installation. Of course, we'll go through how the system will work, how the system will run. That's all well and good. And sometimes, myself, some things you end up forgetting about and some things that you decide to change your mind, and that is absolutely fine. So on the yearly service, or if it's not working for you, we can get renewable teams out there to come and assess the properties, assess how you're using them. Typically on the yearly service, the common question is, am I using this right? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Is it meant to be running all day? Is it meant to be in certain times? And again, there's in those sort of periods of time where we can not only check over the system, give it a good service, we can also advise, like, what are you wanting to get from this? What are you, the consumer, wanting to get out of this heat pump, let's say, for example. And so spending time on those sort of service days, we're more than happy to make sure that we are fitting the bill for each property. And it is key to get it right, because at the end of the day, you are the consumers, you are the residents, you are the ones that the heating system is there for. So we want to make sure that whenever we do come round, ask us the questions. It's what we want to hear. We want to be questioned. We want to make sure the system's right working for you. And we want to make sure that if there is any issues, we can fix them sooner rather than later.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. I suppose that really speaks to, doesn't it, this classic idea of making every contact count. And you were talking there about taking the service as an opportunity to continue that engagement that might have happened when the installation took place, and sort of grabbing opportunistically every opportunity, I suppose, to check in with tenants and residents on this. That's great. Thank you. Cassandra, you mentioned at the outset, obviously, some good examples you think of housing associations doing a good job on this kind of engagement thing. To that point Brian made about time and how do the housing associations find the time to do that, in your experience and the experience of your colleagues at organisations across Scotland, what makes the difference there? What makes a housing association have the ability to step back from timeframes that might be challenging due to, for example, national policy drivers, to actually take the time to get this right? What helps there, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things. I think, as I mentioned, it's about the proactive and reactive support. So, as I say, many of our members will have their own energy advisors who will have built up a relationship with those tenants over time when they first move in. So even before there might be some sort of change to the property, they already know who those people are and have that built up as a positive relationship, and not necessarily, as I said, when things go wrong, that they're the people that they contact. Again, as I mentioned, though, one of the real challenges is the funding element of things, and with funding being on an annual cycle. And it's really difficult for members to try and be strategic and planning ahead over the next few years, which would allow that build-in of time that you're speaking to tenants a year before a project might be starting. That also ties in with the monitoring and evaluation to be able to do a really kind of thorough pre and post monitoring. Again, you need to have started that potentially the winter before any measures take place. And I mentioned that having worked previously in a role where that was my job. But again, that's the issue as well, is it's building in the time at the beginning and the end, again, to do that monitoring piece. But that's really critical, because if you can be able to go back to the tenant and show them the evidence of, well, here your home is half a degree warmer, that might not necessarily be something they can feel, but if you've got the evidence to show them that, then they're going to feel more positive about the experience. And I think similar to that in terms of energy savings as well. I mean, obviously, we've been in a period where energy prices have only be going up. So that's what, the tenants will experience. But again, if you can actually be measuring the energy usage, then you can demonstrate that, well, yes, actually, you have saved energy. Your bills might have gone up more so had these works not been done. So again, it's building in the time at that point afterwards as well. And I think particularly for social landlords, because it's not, once this work is done that they're no longer involved. They have that ongoing relationship with that tenant till the end of their tenancy. So they're always going to be the point of contact.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cassandra. And then, of course, with the tenant that comes after that, and introducing them to the systems that are in place. And interesting that you talked there about the importance of monitoring and building that into a project plan. It's something that Maria has mentioned in one of her questions, talking about the idea of perhaps the need to test systems to evaluate their efficiencies. She says we're finding that air source heat pumps are not always fitted properly, or maybe sensors haven't been correctly located, and the need, I suppose, to be keeping an eye on that and to act, or to identify where there are issues and to act to fix those. Georgina, what's your reflections on this whole area of where you see housing associations or social landlords doing this well? And they've built in enough time, and it's a constant sort of iterative process. What characterizes that? How do they manage to get this right?
I mean, I think it's about adding it to your other work as well, in terms of social landlords are constantly reaching out. They're constantly having estate days. They're constantly working with residents associations. And I think it's about adding these aspects into those contacts and those interactions as well. And being prepared, not necessarily thinking, right, this estate is going to have it in 2026, so in 2025 we'll start this. If it's going to be a rolling program through all your stock, start with everybody. Even if it takes a long time, start introducing those concepts and training up your staff team as well to understand them thoroughly, so that it doesn't need to kind of restart every time. It sort of permeates every aspect of your work, rather than just being a one, now the so-and-so estate is getting it, so now we're going to talk about it.
Absolutely, and that ties really nicely to what Sam was saying as well, doesn't it? Of like, use the services as an opportunity for talking about this, regard this as a continuous process as opposed to a sort of one and done kind of effort. That's great. I'm going to now, we're talking about partnership. We've been talking about partnership a lot, haven't we? All of you have mentioned this throughout the session, of the importance of partnership, obviously with residents, but also within organisations, between housing associations and contractors, and the importance really of building this shared understanding. So a couple of questions, I suppose, that sort of link to that theme. So Maria is brilliant. She sent in loads of brilliant questions. Thanks, Maria. Maria has asked about how do we support housing officers to become more familiar with these technologies, because we talked, didn't we, about the idea that often that will be the person perhaps that a tenant is coming to with concerns or worries about a system. How can we support housing officers to have that knowledge and that comfort? And also, Wayne, Wayne, in my line of work, there's the classic adage of follow the money. And Wayne says, who's going to pay very sensibly for the engagement, training, and support for tenants to use new technologies, which I think is an important question. But I suppose also within social landlord organisations, if we're talking about needing to upskill staff here, where does the responsibility for that sit? Cassandra, do you want to start with that one first? So I suppose two issues there about how do we upskill staff within social landlords to feel comfortable if they are customer facing staff, but also if we're thinking about working in partnership, where do the resources to do this work with residents and indeed with people within social landlord organisations need to come from, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one in terms of housing officers. And as I say, it depends on the structure of the organisation as well. Because as I said, some, organisations will be large enough to have, kind of specialists within their team as well. But yeah, I think it's having those different areas of the organisations working together. I know there are some where, there'll be kind of joint visits between, say, an energy advisor and housing officer. But I think it does come down to training in terms of upskilling, and yeah, making sure that those, as you say, who are on the front line have the skills and confidence to be able to speaking to tenants. And I think we'll see that over time. We are seeing more of these systems coming through, and everybody's learning during that process as well. So I think there will be that natural kind of learning curve as we go through. In terms of the resources and partnerships, yeah, it is really tricky. And again, it's, there's only so much money to go around in terms of the grant funding schemes. So and the focus of that is on, the capital side of things. And these are really expensive projects as well. So every little bit of it is being squeezed out. So yeah, I do think that's, a conversation we need to be having with government about making sure that, this really resource intensive activity, can be funded so that it's not, squeezing other areas of the business. Because ultimately, it's tenants who are going to be paying for this through their rents. And obviously, rightly, there's a pressure to keep those as affordable as possible. So something's going to have to give somewhere. I guess there are some good examples, though, of, certainly our members pooling resources and working together.
Yes.
So I know there's a group of 7-8 organisations who have basically a shared energy advice service. So again, that's run by Changeworks. So, that's a more efficient way of doing things and having that kind of collective project. So I think it's things like that which will make things a bit more efficient, certainly, albeit there is still a cost element to that.
Yeah, absolutely, really good point. I suppose of this classic thing that we often find, don't we, of organisations grappling with the same problem but ploughing a lonely furrow of trying to solve it themselves as opposed to perhaps pooling that knowledge. Georgina, I want to come to you on this one because obviously you run a social enterprise that is working in partnership with organisations to try and get this right. What are your reflections, I suppose, on that upskilling issue? How do we support more people to be more familiar with these systems? And also your reflections on the resources issue and where responsibility for this upskilling of both tenants and staff should lie.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that wherever your organization works, you probably have an organization like my organization somewhere local. Partner with them. Most of us are charities or not-for-profit organizations. You might find we do free training for organizations. You might find, very reasonable training out there. You might find, sort of good partnerships. We work with our local council, which is a stock retaining council. We work with local housing associations. We've gone to their tenant days, we've given free workshops because it helps us with other things that we want, like giving our advice to residents. So sort of look around, there might be more on offer than you think, for not as much as you think it might cost. But also I think it's worth, if you upskill your housing officer to have a conversation right in the beginning, it's going to stave off problems down the line. It's the cliche pay now or pay later. Like these problems don't go away, especially if you're a social landlord. That person might be your tenant for another 40 years. That, issues will come up, and even in ways you might not think. They might not ring up complaining about the heat pump, but they might fall into arrears because they're that they suddenly can't afford things because their bills have gone up or whatever it is, or their mental health is suffering, or their physical health is suffering. So I think it is a case of being proactive, because you'll find yourself having to be more reactive in the long run.
Absolutely, early intervention is always preferable. Yeah, well said. Thanks, Georgina. That's helpful. And also really important points there. Again, building on what Cassandra said about, I suppose, finding areas where there's mutual benefit. You talked about this idea of, sometimes your organization being able to give free training because actually that's helpful in other ways. And Cassandra was talking about the idea of organizations coming together to work on something they're all having to tackle. So I think that's really helpful. We're coming into the last 10 minutes, and I want to finish up with tailoring advice, because this is something, again, that I think all of you, to a greater or lesser extent, spoke about. And we've had a few separate questions on this. So Amy says, on the issue of sort of residents fine-tuning their systems, for instance, I see a lot online from technically interested people talking about making changes to weather compensation curves, etc. However, many residents just want to simply control the system and aren't interested in complex fine-tuning. A very good point, Amy. How do you work with residents in this situation? Do you use any smart optimizers that use smart learning to shift the heat curve? So I suppose really they're kind of talking about this idea of, are there ways that we can make it easier for residents to get the most out of their system, and understanding that some residents will want all the technical information, and others will simply want to know how to turn the system on and off. So that's one. Brian talks about, on tailoring advice, how do you deal with questions of future energy costs in situations where a move to a heat pump may be less favourable? For example, homes with older residents who may require higher levels of heat for longer, or large families where hot water demand is likely to be higher. So that's a second question, I suppose, about tailoring. And then Alyssa says, does anyone know whether the technology being used in heat pumps is being updated or adapted to be easier for users to understand and use in a way that works for them individually? So I suppose really that sort of comes back to the other question we had from Amy about sort of how do we make sure that actually these systems are really easy for people to use. Sam, I'm going to come to you first on that, and I'm going to try to put it into one question, because I'm aware I've given you three separate questions there, which is quite demanding to expect you to answer in 8 minutes. So I suppose really it's about, how do we make sure that we are identifying that the level with which an individual resident may or may not want to engage with the system, and how do we make sure that actually we're getting the right system for their home? You talked throughout your presentation about Sureserve feeling it very, very important to tailor to individual residents and to individual properties. How do you go about doing that?
That's great. Well, thank you for the questions. Yes, so how do we go about doing that? Well, let's start off with the controls. The controls that we install are from the manufacturers, and they're always trying to make them ever easier to control. Some of them work on your own devices, your phone, things like that. But also, when we're installing these systems, it can be an absolute minefield of so much information. None of it's really compact. It's all sort of bombarded yet. So trying to fine tune that is trying to realize what material the individual residents need and the individual processes they need to understand what they need to do. I know you said something about the older residents needing more, and having some residents that may need extra, and then large families having a lot of hot water usage. And this comes down to the fundamental scaling of how big an appliance needs to be upon installation. And this is something that involves so many factors to make sure that we're compensating for different areas. We're compensating for amount of bedrooms, amount of bathrooms, but also how we can deliver heat to as many radiators. It's all got to be scaled. It's all got to be sized correctly. And it is important to get the efficiency done, but also the scaling done. So the scaling is so much more important than people make out to be. You can't just put on a 12 kilowatt, air source heat pump and expect it to work. It's got to be scaled properly. Same with the radiator, same with the hot water, and that might also have other factors such as solar thermal, electric sort of renewable technology. So there is a huge important influx of that, but also not to overwhelm with the materials that we give the guide. We do try and test these systems as we can, and feedback is always welcome, good or bad, from people that are struggling with the systems, or they don't think it's big enough, or they need it on more than it's currently working. So yeah, it is important to have that communication and have that impact to make sure that it is working, because at the end of the day, the residents consider they are the most important people with these systems because they're the ones that are using it. So I fully get where you're coming from with that, and we are ever pushing for simpler systems. We are ever pushing for easier to use, where they're not impacting, I think Sam said earlier, the amount of work that has to be done when it finally is installed. We don't want to make them more work. We don't want people to be cold. So this is important, and it is something that is a very good question to arise as to how we can benefit better. So continuous feedback is fantastic. It's what we want. Also, we're always pushing the boundaries to find the best system to fit the best scale for the best situation. I hope that's answered the question.
It has, Sam. That's great. And yeah, I think Georgina was mentioning earlier as well, this idea of we will just become more familiar with these systems, and obviously there'll be competition within the market as well to have easy to use systems. So hopefully that's something that will progress over time. Georgina, Cassandra, we've only got sort of 4 minutes, but I want to just quickly, if I can, come to both of you on that tailoring question. Just a couple of sentences, if you can. I know it's really tricky, but Georgina, what's your view on how we can make sure that we're taking into account the needs of individual tenants and individual properties when we're looking at driving energy efficiency?
I mean, I think from my experience, most housing associations already do that in one way or another, not perhaps in the regard to these renewable technologies, but they know their residents, they've got a file on them, they know a little bit about their family composition, and the housing officer does work with them. So I think it's building on the knowledge that is already there, rather than kind of, thinking of it as a completely separate activity. And perhaps it's to do with maybe teams working more closely together. Something I've seen is that the sort of technical team might work very separately from the team that already has a lot of contact with the resident, and an easier way to go about it is to maybe merge that knowledge and merge that effort.
Absolutely, well put. Yeah, trying to break down those silos that sometimes exist. Cassandra, do you have reflections on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's about asking tenants what they want and what type of information would be most useful. I mean, there was a project, again, a group of our members were involved and did a kind of a service design approach. It was about an energy advice service for new tenants, but they brought tenants in. They basically co-designed what that service should look like and what they wanted from it. And what came out of that was that they asked for basically a digital information library. So rather than a manual, there was a kind of suite of resources available to them. I know there's been other things where there's been things like where there's been a project where there's been an empty property that's essentially been used as a kind of show home. So the heat pump or whatever technology hasn't been installed there first, and then people can come, they can look at it, they can touch it, they can press all the buttons, and that's a kind of a more practical way of learning for people. So again, it's just making those different things available. I mean, again, there's been things like videos and things that have worked better as well. So there's a whole range of things out there now that we're in this digital world. So yeah, I think that's it.
Absolutely, and that's well put. And thanks, Georgina, and for Cassandra, for keeping those answers brief. I know it's really difficult when someone says to you with 2 minutes to go, oh yeah, so this is a super complex issue, sum this up in a couple of sentences. But you both did a brilliant job there. And as you say, thinking about, I suppose, the diversity of methods that are available that Cassandra was talking about, and Georgina talking about the idea of capitalize on the information that already exists within the organization and use that in different contexts. I have really enjoyed today's session. Thank so much to our panelists. I'm sad it's now time to draw the discussion to a close, but I definitely can't do so without thanking each of those panelists who've spoken today, Cassandra, Sam, and Gina, as well as Sureserve, of course, for supporting today's event. And thanks to you for watching this webinar, for so many excellent questions as well. I do hope you found it interesting and that perhaps it's given you some ideas on how to tackle this challenge of best supporting residents to really get the benefits of energy efficiency measures. It's a topic that we will no doubt continue to discuss at Inside Housing, and I hope that you will join us as we do. And indeed, I hope you'll join us for future webinars on other topics. For now, though, thanks again, goodbye, and see you next time.